Morning, everyone. Today is the 3rd of July. It's the beginning of a new month, new quarter, and the second part of the year. So I hope you guys had a good second quarter of the year, and the first half of 2023. Also, it was profitable for you guys. So welcome. My name is Pedro. I'm the senior market analyst at Alphachain, and in today's session, we are going to look at the weekly market analysis, paying attention to what are we expecting for the week ahead in terms of news and in terms of price direction, covering FX, indices, commodities, and then crypto at the end. So looking for the last week, which was a little bit busy in terms of inflation reports across the world. We started with CPI in Canada, which was a little bit lower than expected, which is good news. Then we also had CPI and inflation again in Australia, which was even better than it was expected. Again, good news, especially after the previous one was actually a little bit higher back in May. It was a little bit higher than expected. So now this one, it was much lower, which is going to be interesting to see, because this week we are going to have interest rate decision in Australia, which is going to be a question mark if there's going to be another hike or another pause in terms of the interest rate. Then you carry on. We had also inflation last Friday on the Eurozone, with the again, slightly better than expected, either the CPI or the core CPI at this point. The normal CPI going from 6.1% to 5.5%. And the core CPI actually increased, which is a little bit of the concern at this point in many central banks. It's exactly the core CPI, not so much the normal CPI, but the core CPI, which is one of the concerns, because it's getting sticky and it's going to be the hardest one to push to the downside. And then, of course, we had also, and we finished the week with the core PC in the US, which is exactly the inflation report that the Fed pay attention to. At least Fed Chair Powell likes to look at it, and it was slightly in alignment with what was expected at this point, being at 4.6%, slightly lower than the 4.7% that was last month. So overall, inflation being a continuation to go and reducing overall, which in some way it's a good news. However, the main concern at this point is also in alignment. It's in regards to the labor market, right? And the labor market is going to be the main focus for this week, especially in the US, right? So it's going to be another first Friday of the month, and every first Friday of the month we have the non-farm payrolls being announced. And before that, throughout the week, we are going to have several labor market reports coming out, starting with it's going to be mostly on, actually all of them on Thursday. Like we start with the ADP non-farm employment change at 1:15, then you have unemployment claims at 1:30, and then we have the job openings at 3 p.m. Right? So it's going to be a full day of unemployment data coming out next Thursday, July 6th, and then finishing the week with the non-farm payroll and the unemployment rate, which is going to be, of course, something to pay attention to. Also, the average hourly earning in this case. And we are looking at the labor market because it's the number one thing that the Fed at this point is looking at. The economy, it's quite strong. Even last week, we had the final GDP for the Q2 in the for the Q1 in the for the Q1 in the US, and it was higher than expected at 2%. So the economy looks good. The inflation, it's always slowly moving down. However, the labor market is still quite tight. For example, the ratio between the unemployment, between job creation and unemployment is still at 1.2%. Basically, it means that for any person that gets unemployed, there's 1.2 job openings that they can go to. Which just still shows the strength in the labor market, and eventually that needs to keep increasing. Right at this point, the Fed in the last FOMC meeting mentioned that he's expecting the unemployment to go to, if not mistaken, 4.3% or 4.1% by the end of the year, and at this point is at 3.7. Even is expected to even go down this Friday to 3.6. So we're expecting at least a 0.4, 0.5% increase until the end of the year in terms of the unemployment in the UK. And this was actually one of the main points covered also during the last week's ECB forum that happened in Sintra, Portugal, which is actually a beautiful place to visit nearby Lisbon, where we had the 4 central bankers. Like we had Christine Lagarde from the ECB, Governor Bay from the Bank of England, Fed Chair Powell from the Fed, and also the government of Bank of Japan. Like we had the 4 of them sitting and answering questions in a panel organized. And unemployment, it was definitely one of the concerns. They touch point in several points, all the way from the inflation, from the interest rate, continuation to move to the upside, pause, or until when are you going to stay at these high interest rates? Also the unemployment and what they're looking for in terms of the employment, which is one of the concerns again for all of them at this point. So yes, again, paying attention to it, because after this data point from unemployment, there isn't that many new reports coming out that's going to affect the next FOMC meeting on the 26th of July, which at this point, as you can see, is basically 90% a possibility of another hike going from 5.25 to 5.5% interest rate decision in the US. And then question mark is there going to be another hike? Yes or no? And for how long are you going to stay at this rate? Right, that's basically one of the concerns. So yes, this week expect that. Today we are going to have PMI, manufacturing PMI being announced. Then on Thursday is going to be the services PMI, which is again interesting to pay attention to. We have seen that manufacturing PMI across Europe and also in the US and UK has been quite bad. It's actually being lower than expected, with the services PMI still above 50, but still not as good. Then tomorrow is going to be bank holiday in the US, Independence Day. So again, that may reduce a little bit the volatility or the liquidity in the market. So it's going to be quite, maybe expect some weird behavior, not a traditional week, and maybe only on Wednesday, everything is going to be back to normal, and maybe normal moves to be expected in the market after everyone comes back from the holiday. We are going to have also the Fed minutes announced from the previous meeting 2 weeks ago, which is going to be interesting, right? Because there was a pause from the Fed, but maybe not everyone was in agreement. And maybe you're going to get more information based on these minutes to find out what should you expect for the next one and even in the future. Because it was also the forecast in there, the dot plot forecast, where they literally kind of agree that maybe another 2 hikes would be expected until 5.6%. So let's see if there's more information from these minutes from that meeting. And that's basically it in terms of the major data points in here to look at. Looking at a little bit of the commodities, we see that oil, right, it's starting now in July. It's going to be a conference on the 5th and the 6th of July with the industry CEOs, oil industries CEOs. It's going to be interesting to see what's going to happen in there. Also because the Saudi Arabia cuts, right, is started now in July, and there's a high probability that's going to be extended to August as well. So yeah, let's see if by any chance we're going to finally move away from this range that we have from basically 66 to 73. Even today, this morning, there's already a big, good spike on the oil, as we'll see in a bit. So looking at the market and how the market reacted to all this, right? In terms of dollar has been continues to be within this range. Nothing really has changed in here. So we are kind of still within this range. let's see what's going to happen this week in terms of, are you going to finally move away to move, continue and resume the move to the upside, or are going to kind of break to the downside? Like, I'm looking more at this range at this point, which is basically since the beginning of May all the way until the end of my beginning of June. So if you pay attention to these two highs, to this high, to these lows, basically price is a little bit in the middle. And there's a chance that price can still even go higher, or even maybe even go low, below this low. At least personally, I'm not really happy, or kind of, I don't really give that much importance to where this will reacted from. I could see price maybe going a little bit lower. It's just same thing with this high. I think price could still go maybe a little bit closer to this highs, or even higher than this, and maybe actually you can start aiming to this other range in here. So it's going to be interesting to see what's going to happen on the dollar for this week. If you're going to continue to be within this range, or eventually gain momentum to one side or the other. Looking at the indices, in particular in the US, starting with the S&P, right? So if you recall our analysis from last week, it happened just as we predicted, right? The trend line, it was too obvious, and there was a really high probability setup that we could have taken advantage of as soon as S&P broke this trend line to the upside. The only thing that didn't really happen, it was the fact that we are looking at this previous level of resistance in here, this high from August, and price actually missed slightly that zone, but he did fake out this low underneath that, and that could have been one of the triggers as well. And then again, after the break of this high in this trend line, that was the opportunity to look for the long. We had a specific target, which would be at least to test of this level, or going all the way and even create new highs, as we mentioned last week as well, because where this high was reacting from, it was still not exactly the zone at the highs, and there was a probability that price would go and carry on, even moving above this high that we had in there. So that was something that we actually looked at, and there you go. Good prediction, good trading setup that we had in here on the S&P. Looking ahead for what we expect for this week, it's going to be interesting, right? So let's see how price is going to react a little bit from this level, or if price wants to go a little bit higher. For now, I'm going to pay attention to how price is going to react from here. Yes, there's still a possibility that price can go a little bit higher. We are getting closer to the Q2 earnings season, which is going to start in the maybe in 10 days or so, in middle of July, which is going to be interesting. Not just as you remember, the Q1 earnings, it was mostly focused on the banking system because of all the crisis in the small banks that happened back in March. Now the focus can still be a little bit in the banking system, but in the banking sector. However, I think the focus is going to be even more in the AI companies, right? Those have been the ones that have managed to push Nasdaq and all the other US indices also to the upside. So everyone's going to be focus on that to see if there's actually some value in there, or if all this enthusiasm it created a small bubble, and maybe it has been a little bit overextended in this case, and maybe there's going to be a correction to the downside. Like, so that's something to keep an eye on for the next 2-3 weeks when you get to the earnings season in here. Meanwhile, yes, there's maybe a little bit of a room, a little bit more to the upside. Again, S&P, it's something that I'm going to pay attention to. It's going to be around this level, or then even getting a little bit higher in there. Nasdaq, a little bit similar, right? Nasdaq had fake out those highs in here on the left. There's maybe a little bit more room to the upside for price to get to, again, those 15,500. Meanwhile, similar to S&P, right? We've took this low and you kind of reverse to the upside after we broke that high. That could have been a good long opportunity in here that we could have taken. A little bit different from the S&P is that this level in here on Nasdaq, there's maybe still orders at these highs. So maybe we could even see a little bit more of a correction in here without the need to break the highs. But overall, we are still in this bullish momentum. So be careful with any sales at the top. If you do find your opportunity, maybe you can take maybe you can take advantage of it, but be cautious with that. We can start having maybe this trend line in here, and eventually you can have that kind of PI. But yes, I think there's still maybe orders in here. Opposite to S&P that already broke the highs as we expected. Nasdaq, there's maybe still something in here that could hold price to the downside at this level. So let's see what's going to happen. Then, of course, we had another zones that if price by any chance wants to go a little bit further down, zones to keep an eye on. And we still have this upper trend line in here since basically the end of April. Like this last almost 2 months and a half has been quite bullish on the S&P. Then we can carry on to the Dow. Another one that we mentioned, again, all the indices were quite correlated as expected. Another strong trend line. As soon as the trend line is broken, you can have the opportunity to look for that long and feel the trend line in there, even go a little bit higher. And again, similar to the Nasdaq, there are still potential sell opportunities underneath this high in here, right? So at this point, a little bit of a correction or already some reaction from there. So let's see if this is going to resume or not. But yes, this one can be quite interesting as well if you do find a good sell opportunity in there. And then you have DAX in here, nice reaction at this point from this level. DAX has been in this range at this point, right? So basically all the way from here, we kind of managed to create a new high, all-time high with that. Went all the way down, we retested the lows and kind of we start moving to the upside. This could have been also a good entry opportunity in there. So let's see if price is ready to go closer to the highs again. Maybe it is, or by any chance, it can resume maybe to this level and then go higher in there maybe before going down again or create a new all-time high in here. All right, so it's going to be interesting on the DAX, which is Germany, right? And there's a little bit of a concern in Germany with the technical recession in Q1 and showing a little bit of weakness as well in the economy, which can be a concern, not just in Germany, but of course then it can spread to the Eurozone as well. Now, looking at the other currency pairs, starting with the Euro index, right? So this was another one that we covered last week. We mentioned that there was a high probability that price would break these highs. Eventually it did, and there was a zone that we were looking for, right? And the zone was for price to go above this high and getting closer to this level, right? That was the next level that we were looking for. That's basically where actually price went to. It didn't really touch the zone itself, so there's maybe a little bit of a room that can still go higher, but we did manage to break these highs. And there was actually a good indication in here that you could have expected sales on the Euro pairs during last week. Like we start moving to the upside, we finally took those highs, and then when you break this low in here, there was a chance that price eventually could fill all the remaining in there. So let's see now what's going to happen in here. I think we may be getting closer and closer to potential reversal in here, also in the Eurozone, on the Euro index, with price kind of moving to the downside. But meanwhile, we may still go a little bit higher before making that move. At this point, this will respected it, but we already have a few lows being broken on the way up, which is exactly what we want to start to see eventually before price making a big turn. So something to keep an eye on the Euro index. And then, of course, special attention to the yen index and to the yen pairs. Reason for that is because we have dollar yen finally reaching and touching the 145, right? And we have been waiting for that 145 for quite a while. The reason for that is because it was the first zone that the Bank of Japan started to intervene last year, back in September 2022. Now, there was a big gap or big difference between what you could see on the yen index and what you could see on the dollar yen, right? While the yen index was making all these strong moves to the downside, the yen index was kind of ranging a little bit. That was because of the dollar as well, right? So the dollar yen wasn't really managing to move that much, and this creates a big gap between the levels where the yen index was and comparing with where dollar yen was, comparing especially with last year's zone. For example, just to give an example, what I mentioned is that 145 on the dollar yen, it meant that yen index was in here, and then this one is when dollar yen was at 151. Right? And as you can see, yen index has already broken both of these levels. It's literally reading in this moment. And now, the last 2 weeks, what we have seen is that, in particular last week as well, is that the yen index is now ranging. Like it has been ranging, starting to lose momentum, not so much big moves to downside, but it starts to range a little bit and starts to show some weakness from the sellers. Maybe the buyers are starting to jump into it. On the other hand, while now we have this range in here, the dollar yen actually, it was quite bullish, and it finally reached that 145 zone. So this is going to be one of the main FX pairs to look at for this week, or even for the remaining of July, to see when are we going to finally, for example, break above this trend line on the yen index, in particular above this highs, and maybe you can start having a momentum to the upside on this yen index, which is going to be a move to the downside on dollar yen, maybe euro yen, Aussie yen, pound yen, and so forth, right? So that's something to keep an eye on. There may be starting to build up a great opportunity to potential sell on the dollar yen. Just something to keep an eye on. And yeah, don't feel FOMO. Don't just start rushing into it. Don't always look for the big turn. Wait for price actually to start having that is about to break some zones in order to then eventually fill the zone. One opportunity could even be not just a break of this trend line, but even break of this high, getting closer to this highs, or then towards that level, or eventually to fill all this in here. So that's going to be interesting to see in here on the end pairs. Meanwhile, if it doesn't really break it, it may just continues to move forward, and you just need to keep following and being patient in that sense. Again, this is the yen index, which is going to be quite interesting, I believe, during this next month of July, even maybe during the summer. We'll see how it's going to behave. So those are the indices that you usually look at. Looking at individual currency pairs, at this point, we are looking at euro dollar, which is quite similar to the yen index, to the dollar index, sorry. And yeah, not much to look at, a little bit in the middle. Again, this low could have been a little bit lower. This high, maybe it's okay. Or maybe wants to go a little bit higher. Again, a little bit of indecision. You managed to break this low last Thursday, if not mistaken. Then we had the correction to the upside, finishing basically the week in there. Today we open already a little bit to the downside. Again, there's maybe more room. If you do break maybe below this level, maybe there's room to go maybe further down. If this level keeps holding, it maybe can start moving a little bit to the upside as well. At this point, yeah, euro dollar or dollar index, they're not exactly the best ones maybe to predict, comparing with where price actually can go to, looking at the extremes. Pound dollar, we had that move to the downside, reacted from a good level in here. Curious to see how price is going to react from there. We were indeed expecting that price would go a little bit further down. After 10 days ago, we had this interest rate decision. Price managed to respect these highs. This is when the BOE hiked by 50 basis points. Yes, we may continue to move to the downside in here. Let's see if price actually managed to hold in there, and then maybe can have the continuation. And let's see if we start aiming towards closer to these holes, or are we going to have a final move up, maybe taking this double top in here before a major turn. Again, looking at the bigger picture, we are kind of still in the middle, and there's still maybe the potential of price getting a little bit closer to this extreme in here before any major turn on price. So we'll see what may happen in here on the pound. Euro pound on the other side, it was kind of bullish as well a little bit during the week, and then reacted from that level and then kind of started to move to the downside. Again, we are kind of within this range at this point as well in here. Then you have Aussie dollar, right? Aussie dollar has been quite weak for this last couple of weeks. It had a good reaction from that level. Question mark is, are we going to eventually continue to move to the downside and eventually take these lows, right? We had a positive news in terms of inflation in Australia last week, and is going to have overnight. I think it's going to be this overnight. We have interest rate decision from the Reserve Bank of Australia. Again, question: is it going to be another hike? Yes or no, or is it going to be a pause in this moment? So that's something to keep an eye on. Yes, there is a potential to get closer to these lows. In here, there's even the potential to break even below these lows and continue to move down. In here, our price can actually just continue to move upwards as well. It's not about zone where this low is reacted from. Yeah, Euro Aussie kind of a little bit of the difference, right? We managed to make all this move to the upside, nice reaction from that level, and let's see now what's going to happen. It's going to be a continuation to the upside, or kind of a little bit more of a deep retracement towards this level, something to look at. And then jumping into the yen pairs, right? And this is what we are looking for. As you can see in here, last Friday with the inflation as well, which was a little bit better than expected, if not mistaken. There you go. We finally reached this 145.06 in the dollar yen, which is basically the base of this structure in here that you're looking for. Now, we're even looking a little bit higher, kind of 145.8 or 0.9. So price definitely can still continue to the upside. And something that we are looking at, it's exactly this, right? We are looking at eventually price to feel this compression. Now, last Friday, price managed to go all the way and retest these lows, and we never really managed to break below this level. Right? So that's a little bit of a concern for me, which can still force price to push and create another high before maybe you have this turn to the downside. But the type of a move that I'm looking for, eventually, it's exactly something like that. I'm eventually waiting for price to feel this zone. First, this one needs to be broken. That hasn't happened yet. So it's something to keep an eye on. And yeah, there's maybe a good opportunity eventually to look for that. If you are still bullish and if you want to continue to rally this dollar yen, which may be the best opportunity, continue. Wait for price maybe to retrace, continue. But at this point, something that I will be concerned of is if you are thinking of price breaking a high and jumping for a trend continuation setup or a breakout setup like this, be careful because we are getting really close to a good level on the left. And at this point, any break of a high that can actually originate a deep retracement before maybe continue to move higher, right? As we call it, and recently in the webinars that we did, this will be a zone 3 move that we are looking at. So we are just waiting for eventually for the trigger for a zone 4. At this point, I would like to see first this low has been broken before a zone 4 is created. So just something to keep an eye on dollar yen. And the same thing that happened last year, right? We can even have a deep retracement first or initial first move to downside quite aggressively, similar to what we had in here. And then price can still even reverse again, create new highs. And then eventually we're going to have maybe the deep move to downside, just similar to what we had afterwards. This was in October last year, right? So there's maybe even a deep retracement, a kind of correct all this, maybe react from this level, and then continuation to the upside. So maybe the first move to downside in here is not going to be the one that's going to completely crush the yen, right? So maybe just a small move, then price can continue to go higher, fake out the highs, and then eventually you may have that move to happen, which can even go somewhere above this zone in here. I wouldn't be surprised if by chance that happens for price to go above this high eventually. But for now, I'm really curious to see how price going to react from there. It's going to be 100% that I'll be following for the next weeks. And then you have the other yen pairs. Like in this case, we have the euro yen. Euro yen kind of move a little bit more to downside. This was helped as well because of the move to downside on the euro index. Again, we're testing previous level structure and we continue with this bullish momentum. Like even though we had kind of 1 or 2 days negative, the price overall is still positive. Again, we are reacting from a zone back in 2008, which is quite far away. And it's a little bit hard to predict maybe where price can react from in order to completely turn. So yeah, be cautious with that. Maybe there's a zone a little bit above that that you can look for. However, something that you need to keep looking at is in this lower time frame, how price is moving and if it's breaking lows or not. At this point, I'm literally expecting at least this highs to be faked out in order to maybe before looking for a turn. Eventually, yes, we can maybe aim towards this level again to feel all this price. Just cautious with that. We already had this first move down. It's nice. You took the demand from here, so now it's getting weaker, and eventually we're going to have that move. We'll see how and when that's going to happen. And then we have the other yen pairs, as I mentioned, continuation with this pound yen. Again, a little bit of move downside. Meanwhile, it's already created new highs. Again, eventually this zone in here is going to be filled. Meanwhile, price just continues to go higher. And we are getting closer to this structure. We are in here. There's a chance that price maybe can go above this high, maybe reacting to something in there, and eventually can even go above that high, getting a little bit closer to this and to this extreme. Right. So there's a little bit more room to the upside on the dollar, on the pound yen. Again, keep following whatever it's in there that you can maybe look for a good level to expect some reaction from. Yeah. Meanwhile, then of course keep an eye on how price is approaching and moving in the intraday levels in here. Again, another one that you maybe want to keep an eye on. Then Aussie yen, a little bit similar. A good reaction from this level. I think you can go a little bit higher towards this level, or even to test the highs in here before aiming to make any move down. So I'm looking for this Aussie yen eventually to continue to move to the upside. And then we jump into dollar CAD, right? Dollar CAD, which had a really strong move to the upside last week. Maybe in basis of the inflation that was a little bit better than expected. So there you go. Like we have been bearish for a while, and we finally had a little bit of a correction in here. It was okay zone where it reacted from, and I'm curious to see now what's going to happen. We have a little bit of this structure. There's maybe the chance that price can go a little bit towards that zone, and on the other hand, we actually managed to break slightly this zone. Something that we're looking for in here on the card is that all this move to the upside, we never really had a deep retracement kind of closer to this level. So maybe now that could happen, and then eventually can have another continuation to the upside towards this level. Right? It's just something to keep an eye on. Again, in terms of a reversal pattern, this was quite good because you start having lows in alignment, creating double lows, triple lows, and eventually have the fake out. You start breaking highs as well. So this is exactly everything that you want to see before a reversal. In any asset that you want to look for that. You need those kind of manipulations to happen before that. So let's see now on CAD what's going to happen. There's going to be also unemployment in CAD next Friday. Dollar franc Swiss, which has been a little bit in this range now for the last few weeks. Again, of course, depending on what the dollar is going to do, dollar franc Swiss can react in accordance to that. Yeah, so interesting to see what's going to happen. Good reaction from there as well. As I mentioned many times, I'm still looking eventually for price maybe to get closer to this level, below this double low in there. So yeah, that's kind of where I expect price to go to before any big reversal. So that's what I'm going to be waiting. For example, and on the other hand, this is actually kind of an engulf to the upside. So that's why I'm actually looking eventually for price to make or to complete this move to the downside. And then maybe looking for long opportunities towards that zone. So let's see exactly how price is going to behave in here on dollar franc Swiss. Meanwhile, if it goes higher, maybe there's opportunity to look for a long, or maybe for a short a little bit higher, or maybe a long if you break again above this size. Maybe there's another opportunity to look for longs, maybe until price maybe gets closer to there. Let's see what's going to happen on the dollar franc Swiss. And now start going into the commodities, right? In this particular gold, which has been quite bearish as well. Good, strong reaction last week. And we just managed to break also this trend line, which is going to be interesting now to see what can happen on gold from here. These highs in here, they're kind of still important. So price can still even react from there and continue to move down. Question mark is this low reacting from a good zone? Or does gold want to continue to move a little bit more to the downside, maybe getting closer to this level? Maybe it wants to go there. Meanwhile, we may have a correction first before maybe resuming to move down. Again, I'm still even open to the possibility of price eventually filling all this, and maybe from here can have another sell opportunity. But yeah, for now we didn't manage to break this trend line, but these highs in here are still important. So let's see how price and gold is going to react from this level. Is going to continue to move upwards, or by any chance eventually break new lows and eventually continue to move a little bit more to the downside, maybe getting closer to this 1860 or 58. Something to look at on gold. Yes, we'll see. And then we have oil, right? And oil is the one that already had a little bit of a spike this morning, going from 70 to basically almost 72. Again, it was another range, right? Last week it was close to the lows and reacted again from these lows and all the way to the highs, right? That's it seems like that's those are the opportunities to look for on oil at this point until eventually we do break that range. Now the range can actually be all the way from these highs, so you can even now getting a little bit closer to these highs, maybe fake it, this 72 mark. 72.8 and getting a little bit maybe closer to this 73 zone in here, and then maybe resuming again to move to the downside. There's maybe new orders again in here, and let's see for how much longer we are going to stay within this level, right? That's going to be that seminar on the 5th and the 6th of July this week. And also these concerns in the economy that the interest rates are going to stay high for much longer. This can also be a concern in the demand side, also the reduction in the supply side. So let's see exactly how this situation is going to affect the price on oil. But at this point, looking at the chart itself, if you do like to trade ranging markets, those are the opportunities for you, waiting for price to get to the extreme at the lows, looking maybe for longs, and when eventually gets closer to the extreme at the highs, maybe there's another opportunity to look for a sell. Right? Basically, those have been the opportunities so far at this point. Just pinpointing a few of them that happened during these last few months. Now, jumping through into crypto, right, and Bitcoin, which is exactly something that we have been looking for as well. After the big rally in the middle of June, we reached that high on the left, which is still an important high in here, back from June and May from last year. So let's see what's going to happen now. Right? We noticed, so we mentioned that there was a high probability that if by any chance price had broken these lows, there could be a good sell opportunity from these highs. That happened. We even managed to break this low as well. Right? There's maybe some news in regards to the SEC and the situation with approval or not regarding Bitcoin and ETF with some high institutions. So we'll see how those news actually are going to affect also Bitcoin. We are in this key zone. This for me, it's an important level, also because of these highs, which if you break above that level, then you may continue to go higher, or to see if you're going to have some kind of correction a little bit, getting closer to this level where we were before, maybe 26,000 or so, where we were in the middle of June. So yeah, let's see exactly what's going to happen. A little bit of volatility over the weekend. The retest of these highs in here back at 31,000 can be interesting to see how price eventually is going to react from there. If we're going to kind of resume to move to downside or not. We didn't manage to break this low, so that's interesting to pay attention to in here. So yes, on one side, maybe Bitcoin doesn't really need to break any new highs in there. On the other side, Ethereum is quite the opposite. And we mentioned also that last week, because while Bitcoin is maybe already reacting from a good level, basically Bitcoin already even managed to break above this high and kind of trading a little bit from there. Ethereum was lagging. On the other side, it was lagging, but it was giving information that it wanted to go higher. How? By breaking these highs. Like we had managed to break these highs last week. And that will show that price most likely wanted to continue to move higher, even getting closer to this level, or eventually even getting closer to here. Like at this point, basically, if you're by any chance looking for any long opportunity, maybe Ethereum would be a better opportunity, a better chance than Bitcoin itself. As you can see, it's breaking structure, while Bitcoin is just within that range. In here, nice reaction from this level. And meanwhile, it's creating new highs, and it may continue. Let's see how it's going to react from this level, and eventually how it's going to react from this level as well. So yes, for example, also this high on Ethereum back in April, it was already the reaction from the extreme in here in May, June, basically where Bitcoin just reacted from last week. And this is how you can use also correlation to look for a really similar to what you mentioned before on the US indices. So yes, let's see exactly if it's going to continue and eventually getting closer to this highs, and after that maybe can move to downside, and Bitcoin as well, how it's going to react from those highs. And that's it for me, guys. Thank you again for taking the time. Leave any comments if you have any questions. Again, this week main focus, unemployment, right? Labor market data that's going to come out, and how is the market going to react to it, and is the data going to be better or worse than expected? And based on that, we'll see what the Fed will do in the next meeting. The yen pairs, big attention. Are you going to have a reversal, or the dollar yen is going to continue to move to the upside? Euro index, is it going to continue slightly to move higher and eventually have this big turn to the downside? Yes or no? What about also the US indices? Is it going to break new highs, Nasdaq, or it is going to be able to hold that level and push price to the downside? It's going to be also something to keep an eye on. And of course, dollar, is there going to be any momentum being created? Yes or no? So that's basically what you're going to pay attention to. For anyone from the US, happy holiday season tomorrow. On our side, we'll see you next week for the next weekly market analysis. All the best, guys, and happy month of July. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.